Blood smeared across expensive marble, Amara Jackson trembled as armed security guards surrounded her. The crowd at Whitehall Medical Center gasped. 8-year-old black girl from Oakwood projects against white billionaire Maxwell Thornton. Nobody knew Amara had just saved his son Thomas from lifetime darkness orchestrated by Maxwell himself. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more hidden truths exposed. How far would a billionaire go to hide his secrets, and what power could an innocent child possess to bring it all crashing down? Stay with me to discover how a touch from tiny hands would change everything. Maxwell Thornton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, surveying the city below like a modern king overseeing his domain. At 45, his salt-and-pepper hair and tailored suits projected the image of success, but his cold eyes revealed something darker beneath. Worth $18 billion, Maxwell had transformed Thornton Pharmaceuticals from his father's modest medical supply company into a global powerhouse through ruthless expansion and questionable ethics. The jewel of his empire, Whitehall Estate, sat perched on the hills overlooking Oakwood, a predominantly black neighborhood that Maxwell had been systematically trying to demolish for years under the guise of urban renewal. His expansion plans required the land, and he considered the residents mere obstacles rather than human beings with rights and histories tied to their community. Inside that mansion lived his 7-year-old son Thomas, believed blind, since birth kept in isolation under the watchful eyes of specialized caretakers and subjected to endless experimental treatments. Maxwell's public narrative painted him as a devoted father, desperate to cure his son's condition, but the reality within those walls told a different story. Thomas's room resembled a hospital suite more than a child's bedroom, with medical equipment dominating the space where toys should have been. Monitors tracked his vital signs constantly, and a rotation of medical staff administered treatments according to strict protocols established by Dr. Victoria Pierce, Maxwell's chief medical advisor and the person who spent more time with Thomas than Maxwell himself. The boy's mother, Elizabeth, had officially died during childbirth according to all public records, a tragedy that fueled Maxwell's public image as a widower dedicating his life to medical research in her honor. This narrative had earned him sympathetic profiles in business magazines and deflected questions about his aggressive business tactics. Dr. Pierce not only managed Thomas's care but also helped Maxwell acquire properties in Oakwood through her connections with city officials and hospital administrators who sat on zoning boards. Her cool efficiency complemented Maxwell's strategic vision, and together they had removed numerous obstacles to Thornton's expansion. While presenting himself as a philanthropist publicly, Maxwell privately employed racial prejudice in his business decisions, especially in hiring practices at Thornton Pharmaceuticals, where executive leadership remained exclusively white, despite the diverse population of qualified professionals in the city. His treatment of Oakwood residents proved even more callous, referring to them in private meetings as those people who didn't understand the value of progress. Just last week, the Thornton Foundation had announced a breakthrough treatment for childhood blindness, generating positive press that painted Maxwell as a benevolent force for good while carefully concealing his true intentions. Protesters from Oakwood frequently gathered outside Thornton Tower, the gleaming headquarters downtown, demanding fair treatment and an end to predatory property practices. Maxwell's security teams, composed primarily of former military personnel, routinely harassed these protesters, photographing participants to identify community leaders for targeted pressure. Intimidation tactics included spurious police complaints, sudden building code inspections for businesses owned by protest organizers, and even direct threats delivered under the guise of community outreach. Maxwell viewed the residents of Oakwood not as fellow citizens, but as inconvenient variables in a business equation, obstacles to be calculated and removed with clinical efficiency. This foundation of prejudice and power would soon collide with an unexpected force that even $18 billion couldn't control or anticipate, setting in motion events that would expose the darkest corners of the Thornton Empire to the light of truth and justice. Amara Jackson skipped over cracked sidewalks on her way home from school, carefully avoiding the places where concrete had buckled from years of neglect in the Oakwood neighborhood. At 8 years old, she carried both the lightness of childhood and the weight of growing up too fast in a community the rest of the city pretended not to see. She lived with her grandmother Louisa in a third-floor apartment with peeling wallpaper and temperamental plumbing. But Grandma Louisa made it feel like a palace through sheer force of will and boundless love. Amara had lost her parents 3 years earlier in what officials called an industrial accident at a chemical processing plant owned by a Thornton subsidiary. The settlement barely covered funeral expenses, leaving Louisa to raise Amara on her own, while the official investigation conveniently disappeared into corporate legal departments. Despite these hardships, Amara possessed something remarkable that set her apart from other children her age, an exceptional intuition and perception that allowed her to notice details others missed. She could sense emotions in a room before anyone spoke, predict when her grandmother's arthritis would flare up before Louisa felt the first twinge, and sometimes even finish strangers' sentences as if she could read the thoughts forming in their minds. Amara attended Oakwood Elementary, where funding cuts implemented by the city council under pressure from business interests, primarily Thornton Pharmaceuticals, had eliminated the art programs she loved. Her teacher, Miss Problis Williams, often smuggled in art supplies purchased from her own meager salary because she recognized Amara's talent for expressing through color and form what she couldn't always articulate in words. Louisa worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat, including night shifts cleaning at Whitehall Medical Center, the prestigious hospital where the wealthy received treatment unavailable to Oakwood residents, despite being only miles away. On days when childcare arrangements fell through, Louisa would bring Amara along, instructing her to sit quietly in the staff break room with her schoolbooks. Naturally curious, Amara often wandered the less restricted areas of the hospital during these visits, observing patients and staff with her unusually perceptive eyes. She noticed patterns in patients' behaviors that even medical professionals missed. The slight facial twitch preceding a seizure, the particular quality of breathing that indicated pain, the subtle changes in skin tone that suggested medication reactions. During one such visit, Dr. James Carter, a brilliant black neurologist who faced constant microaggressions and barriers to advancement, despite his exceptional qualifications, noticed Amara correctly identifying stroke symptoms in a patient before medical tests confirmed the diagnosis. Intrigued rather than dismissive, Dr. Carter began documenting her unusual abilities, secretly recognizing something extraordinary that deserved understanding rather than exploitation. Back in Oakwood, the situation grew increasingly desperate as Thornton's property company purchased their apartment building, joining dozens of others now owned by the conglomerate. Eviction notices appeared with alarming frequency throughout the neighborhood, displacing families who had lived there for generations. Many gathered at the community center where attorney Keisha Washington, a former corporate lawyer who had abandoned a lucrative career to fight for housing justice, organized resistance against Thornton's predatory practices. Louisa joined these meetings with Amara in tow, the child absorbing conversations about legal tactics, protest organization, and community solidarity while drawing in her worn sketchbook. The atmosphere in Oakwood grew increasingly tense as security personnel from Thornton properties became more aggressive in their patrols, often harassing residents for simply walking near buildings now owned by the company. During one community protest, Amara witnessed security guards roughly handling Mr. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor who walked with a cane, shoving him to the ground when he moved too slowly from an unauthorized area that had been a public park until Thornton purchased it the previous month. That night, Amara experienced vivid nightmares, unusual for a child normally blessed with peaceful sleep. She dreamed of a boy trapped in darkness, calling for help, but unable to find his way out of shadows that seemed deliberately placed around him. The dreams left her exhausted and confused, not understanding that these were the first manifestations of a psychic connection to Thomas Thornton, a boy she had never met but whose fate would soon intertwine with hers in ways neither child could imagine. The contrast between their worlds could not have been starker. Thomas surrounded by wealth, but imprisoned in manufactured darkness. Amara facing daily hardships, but blessed with extraordinary perception and the freedom to see truth that others missed. These differences would soon become the catalyst for revelations that would shake the Thornton empire to its foundations and change both children's lives forever. The morning dawned with gray clouds gathering over Oakwood, matching the mood of residents preparing for another protest at Thornton Tower downtown. Community organizers had planned this demonstration to coincide with a press conference where Maxwell Thornton would announce expanded urban renewal plans, a euphemism everyone recognized as the further dismantling of their neighborhood. Louisa hesitated to bring Amara but had no alternative childcare after budget cuts eliminated after-school programs. "Stay close," she instructed her granddaughter, wrapping a bright yellow scarf around Amara's neck so she could easily spot her in the crowd. "Promise you won't wander off." Amara nodded solemnly, but even as she made this promise, she felt an unfamiliar tugging sensation inside her mind, like an invisible thread pulling her towards something important. The protest began peacefully outside Thornton Tower's gleaming glass entrance, with community members holding handmade signs and chanting for justice and fair housing practices. Maxwell Thornton, watching from his penthouse office via security cameras, frowned at the disruption to his carefully orchestrated media event and made a brief call to security. Within minutes, private security personnel in tactical gear emerged, creating an intimidating barrier between protesters and the building. When an elderly woman accidentally stepped beyond the hastily established perimeter, guards immediately shoved her backward, triggering outrage and escalation. In the ensuing chaos, Amara felt the invisible thread pull stronger, almost painful in its urgency. She lost sight of her grandmother's yellow scarf as the crowd surged backward. Instead of feeling frightened, Amara experienced a strange certainty about where she needed to go. She slipped between distracted guards, following her inexplicable intuition through a service entrance normally secured but temporarily left unmonitored as security focused on the growing protest. Inside, Amara moved with surprising confidence through corridors she'd never seen before, somehow knowing exactly which turns to take. Security cameras tracked her movement, but the command center was overwhelmed, monitoring the protest, missing the small girl navigating deeper into the building's restricted areas. The tugging sensation led her to a secured elevator requiring keycard access, but as she hesitated before it, a distracted doctor exited inadvertently, allowing her to slip inside before the doors closed. Amara pressed the button for the 14th floor, without knowing why, the number simply feeling right, in a way she couldn't explain. On the 14th floor, Amara found herself in a hushed, sterile corridor that reminded her of Whitehall Medical Center, where her grandmother worked. Signs identified this as the Thornton Private Medical Research Wing, with restricted access warnings prominently displayed. Security guards appeared at the far end of the hallway, forcing Amara to duck into an alcove as they passed, discussing the protest situation in terse professional terms. Once they passed, she continued following her instincts, until reaching a door marked simply TT Treatment Suite. The electronic lock glowed red, denying access, but as Amara placed her small hand against it in frustration, the light inexplicably flickered green. Inside, she discovered a room that resembled a strange hybrid of a child's bedroom and intensive care unit. Medical equipment surrounded a bed where a thin boy, approximately her age, lay connected to monitors and IV lines. Despite being alone, he wore darkened glasses, and various machines emitted soft beeps tracking his vital signs. This was Thomas Thornton, though Amara had no way of knowing his identity. She approached cautiously, noticing how the boy's head turned slightly toward her footsteps despite his apparent blindness. "Hello," she whispered, surprised, when he flinched at the sound. According to all reports and records, Thomas Thornton had been deaf since birth, as well as blind. "Who's there?" the boy whispered back, his voice raspy from disuse, speaking words he supposedly couldn't have learned without hearing. Astonished, Amara moved closer until she stood beside his bed. "I'm Amara. Why are you in here all alone?" Without waiting for permission, she reached out and touched his hand, an instinctive gesture of comfort. The moment their skin connected, Thomas gasped loudly, his body going rigid. "I can see you," he whispered in shock, reaching up to pull off his darkened glasses. His eyes, a startling blue, focused directly on Amara's face with wonder and confusion. "I can see you," he repeated, louder tears beginning to stream down his face. This unprecedented event triggered alarms on his monitoring equipment, bringing the sound of running footsteps in the corridor. Amara stepped back in surprise as the door burst open, revealing Dr. Victoria Pierce, whose expression transformed from professional concern to naked fear upon seeing them together. "What have you done?" she demanded quickly, checking Thomas's vital signs before pressing an emergency button on her pager. "Security breach in TT Suite Priority 1. She spoke into a wall-mounted intercom before turning to Amara. "How did you get in here? Who sent you?" Before Amara could answer, the doctor was preparing a syringe with practiced efficiency. "No more," Thomas protested, reaching toward Amara even as Dr. Pierce injected the contents into his IV line. "Please don't go," he murmured, as his eyes began to lose focus, the medication taking rapid effect. Amara backed toward the door as the boy slipped into unconsciousness, but not before noticing a tray of medication vials beside his bed. Acting on impulse, she grabbed one and slipped it into her pocket, just as security alarms began blaring throughout the floor. In the ensuing confusion of responding personnel, Amara managed to slip down a service stairwell, her heart pounding with the certainty that she had witnessed something profoundly wrong. The vial felt heavy in her pocket, carrying a truth she didn't yet understand, but somehow knew was important. At home that evening, after a frantic reunion with her grandmother who had searched the entire protest area for her, Amara showed Louisa the medication vial she'd taken. Louisa's expression grew grave as she recognized the label from her work at the hospital, an experimental compound documented to have dangerous neurological side effects, one that had been rejected for approval by regulatory agencies, but somehow continued to be produced in Thornton's pharmaceutical divisions. Meanwhile, in his office, Maxwell Thornton reviewed security footage with cold fury. "Find her," he ordered his security chief, pointing at Amara's image on the screen. "I want to know who she is, who sent her, and what exactly happened in that room." He studied the footage, showing Thomas removing his glasses, focusing on something he shouldn't have been able to see. Increase security on Thomas and accelerate the treatment schedule, he instructed Dr. Pierce, who stood nervously in the corner. "We can't risk any more anomalies." Before the demonstration, neither adult noticed that in Thomas's room beneath his pillow, the boy had hidden a crude drawing made during a moment of clarity, a portrait of a young black girl, with kind eyes who had somehow broken through years of artificially imposed darkness with just a touch. Do you believe a child's intuition can be more powerful than all the technology money can buy? Comment number 1, if you think Amara's special abilities are a gift that should be protected, or number 2, if you think Maxwell has the right to pursue his medical research without interference. Give this video a thumbs up if you're already suspicious about Thomas's treatments, and hit subscribe to follow Amara's dangerous journey. What exactly is Maxwell Thornton hiding about his son's condition, and why would a pharmaceutical billionaire deliberately keep his only child in darkness? The answers might shock you even more than what we've seen so far. The next morning, Maxwell Thornton convened an emergency meeting in his private conference room overlooking the city skyline. Present were his head of security, Jackson Reed, a former military contractor with a reputation for efficiency regardless of methods, Dr. As Wihala B. Case, end of Tutar Vricom, end of Tuham, Victoria Pierce, visibly uncomfortable after yesterday's incident, and Lawrence Wilson Thornton's chief legal counsel, who specialized in problems that required creative solutions outside conventional frameworks. "I want everything we have on the girl," Maxwell began without preamble, displaying enhanced security footage of Amara on the room's wall screen. "She represents a significant breach of protocol and potentially compromises years of work." Reed scrolled through a tablet, projecting his findings alongside Amara's image. Amara Jackson, age 8. Lives with grandmother Louisa Jackson in Oakwood. Parents deceased in the Thornton Chemical subsidiary incident 3 years ago. At this information, Maxwell's expression remained impassive, though a subtle tension appeared around his eyes. The settlement included standard non-disclosure agreements. Wilson interjected quickly. Any connection to our current situation would be circumstantial at best. Reed continued his briefing. The grandmother works janitorial at Whitehall Medical Center, often bringing the child when childcare falls through. No obvious connection to industrial espionage or competitor research. Maxwell turned to Dr. Pierce. Explain exactly what happened in that room. Spare no detail. The doctor shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. Thomas was scheduled for his regular treatment. Security logs show the door accessing his suite approximately 17 minutes before I arrived for administration. Upon entry, I found the Jackson girl standing beside Thomas's bed. They appeared to be communicating, which should have been impossible given his condition. Most concerning. She hesitated before continuing. Thomas had removed his protective eyewear and claimed visual perception. Reed interrupted. The footage shows physical contact between them. Could she have interfered with his medication delivery system? Dr. Pierce shook her head. The delivery mechanisms were intact. However, a vial of compound TH7734 is missing from inventory. Maxwell slammed his hand on the table. You're telling me this child wandered in, touched my son, reversed symptoms we've carefully maintained for 7 years and walked out with proprietary medication worth millions in research investment? His voice remained controlled, but carried deadly precision. Find her. Retrieve our property. Ensure there are no lingering complications. Reed nodded, already formulating tactical approaches. I'll establish surveillance on their residence immediately. We'll classify her as a dangerous trespasser who assaulted hospital staff and stole experimental medication. The security footage can be adjusted to support this narrative if necessary. Maxwell turned to his legal counsel. Wilson, prepare contingencies. I want pressure applied to anyone connected to the Jackson family. Start with employment. Within hours, Thornton's influence machinery activated across the city. At Whitehall Medical Center, Louisa Jackson was called into administration and summarily terminated for alleged theft of hospital supplies, charges fabricated but impossible to disprove against the word of management. Simultaneously, Thornton's security teams established unmarked surveillance vehicles throughout Oakwood, focusing on the Jackson apartment building and Amara's school. The medication vial, meanwhile, had sparked Louisa's worst fears. Having worked in healthcare for decades, she recognized danger when she saw it. After her abrupt termination, she called her nephew Troy, a computer security specialist who lived in a suburb beyond Thornton's immediate influence. We need to disappear for a while, she told Amara that evening, packing essential items into 2 small bags. Troy will help us understand what this is. She held up the medication vial, careful not to allow her granddaughter to see the fear in her eyes. You've stumbled onto something dangerous, baby girl. At Whitehall Estate, Dr. Pierce conducted emergency procedures on Thomas, administering increased doses of the compounds that maintained his sensory suppression while using additional medications to disrupt formation of new memories about Amara. However, something had fundamentally changed in the boy's neurological responses. Where previously he had passively accepted treatments, Thomas now physically resisted, requiring restraints for the first time in years. More concerning to Dr. Pierce were the drawings she discovered hidden beneath his mattress, crude but recognizable sketches of buildings and streets. He should never have seen particularly structures in Oakwood visible only from specific vantage points. Dr. James Carter, conducting a routine consultation in an adjacent department, noticed discrepancies in Thomas's medical records during a system-wide review. Blood work results showed compounds inconsistent with the documented treatment protocols, suggesting induced symptoms rather than congenital issues. His suspicions aroused Dr. Carter began quiet inquiries, carefully avoiding attention, while building a parallel medical profile of Thomas Thornton. His investigation led him to Keisha Washington, the attorney representing Oakwood residents against Thornton's expansion plans, seeking context for understanding the business practices behind the medical anomalies he was uncovering. Thornton security forces, meanwhile, escalated their search for Amara throughout Oakwood, conducting increasingly aggressive operations thinly disguised as drug enforcement, but clearly targeting specific demographics. Officers used excessive force during questioning, particularly with families including young children Amara's age. These actions heightened existing community tensions as racial profiling became obvious in the search parameters and enforcement methods. Troy Jackson, receiving his aunt and young cousin at his modest home outside the city, immediately recognized the seriousness of their situation. His apartment, filled with computer equipment from his security consulting business, became their temporary sanctuary while he examined the medication vial. Using contacts in pharmaceutical research, he identified the compound as containing neurological suppressants, specifically targeting sensory processing centers in the brain. "This isn't medication that treats blindness," he explained to Louisa, while Amara slept in the spare bedroom. Based on the molecular structure, it would induce sensory disruption, essentially creating blindness rather than treating it. This revelation confirmed Louisa's worst suspicions about what Amara had witnessed. As a precaution, Troy helped Amara record a detailed video account of her experience, with Thomas storing it securely on encrypted servers as insurance against whatever might come next. Maxwell's desperation grew as days passed without locating Amara. He approved increasingly extreme measures, including bribing police officers to prioritize finding her without proper warrants or probable cause. Whatever it takes, he instructed Reed during their daily briefing. "The demonstration is scheduled for next month. We cannot have complications." The demonstration he referred to would be the public unveiling of Thomas's cure, a carefully orchestrated medical miracle that would launch Thornton Pharmaceutical's most profitable product line, yet while coincidentally erasing the last residential blocks of Oakwood to eliminate any remaining connections to the original experiments conducted there years ago. What neither Maxwell nor his team realized was that the brief connection between Thomas and Amara had established something unprecedented, a neurological bridge that distance and medication could not completely sever. Each night, as the drugs temporarily diminished in Thomas's system during sleep cycles, the children's minds reached for each other across the city, sharing fragments of vision, memory, and truth that would ultimately expose everything Maxwell had worked so methodically to hide. Dr. James Carter's reputation for meticulous attention to detail had earned him respect among his peers, despite the constant barriers to advancement he faced as one of the few black neurologists at Whitehall Medical Center. This same methodical approach now guided his investigation into Thomas Thornton's medical anomalies. Using his hospital credentials, Dr. Carter secured temporary access to Thomas's complete medical history through an administrative override justified by a fabricated neurological consultation request. Working late into the night when fewer eyes monitored system access, he discovered a disturbing pattern: regular administration of vision-suppressing drugs disguised as treatments for a condition that apparently never existed. Comparing birth records to current files, he found the original documents showed a perfectly healthy infant with normal neurological responses, contradicting the later narrative of congenital blindness and auditory impairment. These records had been systematically altered months after Thomas's birth, creating a manufactured medical history that justified ongoing experimental interventions. Digging deeper required looking beyond the hospital's systems. Dr. Carter used professional research credentials to access pharmaceutical regulatory filings, discovering Maxwell Thornton's involvement in experimental trials 20 years earlier that resulted in several suspicious deaths. These incidents had been buried under settlements and non-disclosure agreements, but the molecular structures tested then showed striking similarities to compounds now administered to Thomas. The implications disturbed Dr. Carter so profoundly that he encrypted his findings and stored them in multiple secure locations before continuing his investigation. Across town, Amara experienced increasingly vivid connections with Thomas during sleep. What began as vague impressions evolved into clear shared consciousness, allowing her to occasionally see through his eyes during moments when the medications temporarily waned in effectiveness. She began drawing detailed layouts of rooms and corridors she had never physically visited inside Thornton Estate, including security features and medication storage facilities. The precision of these drawings alarmed Troy, who recognized them as potential evidence of corporate crimes, but also understood they placed Amara in greater danger. "How do you know these things?" he asked gently, as she completed another detailed sketch of Thomas's treatment room. Amara shrugged the motion containing the simple acceptance children often show toward extraordinary circumstances. "I see them when I sleep. Thomas shows me so I can help him." Troy's technical skills proved crucial in expanding their understanding of the situation. Using specialized software to bypass security protocols, he accessed portions of Thornton Pharmaceutical's research database through vulnerabilities in their external vendor connections. What he discovered confirmed their worst suspicions: a patent application filed jointly by Maxwell Thornton and Dr. Victoria Pierce for sensory manipulation compounds with dual capabilities: the ability to temporarily induce or remove sensory disabilities. The patent documentation included projected military applications worth billions, allowing artificial creation of operatives with enhanced specific senses while suppressing others for specialized missions. These compounds could also be weaponized to disable enemy combatants' sensory systems, temporarily creating strategic advantages in combat situations. The ethical implications were staggering, as were the potential profits for whoever controlled this technology. Meanwhile, attorney Keisha Washington had been constructing a different kind of case against Thornton Enterprises. Following Dr. Carter's initial inquiries, she focused her legal team on uncovering the corporate structure behind Maxwell's empire. Through painstaking research into public records and confidential sources, she discovered how Maxwell had systematically eliminated minority business partners, including Amara's parents, through suspicious accidents, followed by manipulated contracts that transferred ownership stakes to his exclusive control. Most disturbing was evidence suggesting Maxwell's wife Elizabeth hadn't died in childbirth as publicly claimed. Hospital records indicated she had participated in early pharmaceutical trials of the same compounds later used on Thomas, suffering catastrophic neurological damage that led to her death shortly after his birth. The official narrative had been carefully constructed to eliminate any connection between her death and the experimental medications, while simultaneously creating the sympathetic widower image that deflected scrutiny from Maxwell's business practices. The truth became increasingly clear. Through these parallel investigations, Maxwell had been using his own son as a long-term test subject for drugs designed to temporarily induce blindness, planning to cure him publicly as proof of the plan, medication's reversibility and effectiveness. This demonstration would coincide with the launch of Thornton Pharmaceutical's most ambitious product line, establishing market dominance in neurological modification, while simultaneously eliminating the Oakwood community where early, experimental trials had occurred without proper oversight or consent. The connections between these seemingly disparate elements crystallized one evening when Dr. Carter, Troy, and Keisha cautiously met to share findings in a location outside Thornton's surveillance network. "The timeline matches perfectly," Keisha explained, laying out corporate acquisition documents alongside development milestones for the sensory compounds. Each expansion of Thornton Pharmaceuticals corresponds with elimination of witnesses or evidence from the original experiments. Troy contributed technical analysis of the medication vial Amara had taken. "This isn't just about profit. The formulation indicates they've achieved temporary sensory modification without permanent damage, something unprecedented in neuropharmacology. Thomas is living proof the effects can be maintained long-term and then reversed for demonstration." Dr. Carter nodded gravely. "Which explains the accelerated security and increased dosages I've observed in Thomas's recent treatment protocols. They're preparing for a public demonstration of his cure that will launch the commercial applications." None of them articulated the most disturbing aspect: that a father had deliberately imprisoned his own child in artificial disability for years to advance corporate profits and personal power. Even in a world familiar with corporate greed, this level of calculated cruelty toward an innocent child represented something beyond normal ethical boundaries. For Amara, however, the situation remained simpler despite its growing complexity. Each night, as she drifted to sleep, her connection with Thomas strengthened. They shared fragments of memory and experience, her sunlit days in Oakwood contrasting with his sterile isolation, her grandmother's loving presence against his father's cold ambition. Through this inexplicable bond, Thomas gained understanding of the outside world, while Amara learned crucial details about Thornton's operations and security systems. Neither child fully comprehended how their unique connection would ultimately undermine an empire built on exploitation and prejudice, but both sensed that together they possessed something powerful enough to challenge even the most entrenched systems of control and corruption. Troy's apartment had become command central for their growing resistance movement, with encrypted communications linking Dr.com 247, Carter, Keisha, Washington, and Louisa in their separate efforts to document Thornton's activities. The walls displayed maps of Thornton properties overlaid with timelines of suspicious incidents, creating a visual representation of corporate corruption spanning decades. Troy had implemented extensive digital security measures, including signal jammers, rotating IP addresses, and physical air-gapping of critical systems containing their most damaging evidence against Maxwell. Despite these precautions, a breach occurred at 3:17 in the morning when Thornton's elite hacking team exploited a previously unknown vulnerability in the electrical grid's smart meter system to gain remote access to Troy's network. Silent alarms triggered throughout the apartment, waking Troy from a restless sleep at his keyboard. "We're compromised," he announced, tersely initiating emergency protocols they had rehearsed but hoped never to implement. 4 minutes to full system infiltration. Louisa immediately began gathering essentials, while Troy transferred critical files to secure offline storage. Amara startled from sleep during an intense connection session with Thomas retained fragments of his consciousness as she rushed to dress. "They're coming here," she stated, with certainty that transcended ordinary knowledge. "Thomas says his father sent everyone." Troy's monitors confirmed her warning, as security system alerts showed multiple vehicles converging on their location from different directions. A professional tactical approach designed to eliminate escape routes. Separation protocol, Troy decided grimly, handing Louisa a pre-programmed phone and memorized coordinates for an emergency rendezvous point. "They want Amara most. I'll create a diversion." Before Louisa could protest, Troy continued with urgent practicality. "Get her to Dr. Carter. He has medical credentials to document her connection to Thomas. That's evidence they can't erase." The escape proceeded according to their contingency plan, with Troy creating a digital distraction by triggering false alerts at multiple locations across the city. This momentarily confused the approaching security teams, creating a narrow window for Louisa and Amara to slip away through a neighbor's connected garden access. Troy remained behind, systematically destroying storage devices after confirming their contents had been securely transferred. When Thornton's security team breached his apartment 12 minutes later, led personally by Jackson Reed, Troy offered no resistance, but also no information despite increasingly aggressive interrogation techniques. Transported to a private facility owned by a Thornton subsidiary, Troy found himself facing Maxwell Thornton directly in a sterile interrogation room designed for complete isolation and psychological pressure. "I respect certain aspects of your expertise." Maxwell began conversationally reviewing Troy's professional background on a tablet. "Your cybersecurity innovations could have earned you a comfortable position in my organization under different circumstances." Troy remained silent, noting the calculated approach, establishing rapport before escalation, standard interrogation methodology. Maxwell continued, his tone hardening slightly. "However, your choice to align yourself with an illegal intrusion into my private medical facility changes our potential relationship significantly." When Troy continued his silence, Maxwell's facade of professionalism slipped, revealing the racial attitudes that informed his business practices. "You people from Oakwood have consistently failed to recognize the opportunities I've offered for advancement. Instead, you cling to outdated community structures while obstructing genuine progress. The mask had dropped completely now, with Maxwell dismissing Troy's rights entirely based on his race and origins. The girl has taken something that belongs to me. Tell me where she is, and your legal complications become significantly less severe. Troy's only response was a question. Does Thomas know what you've done to him? The question triggered visible rage in Maxwell, who terminated the interrogation but instructed Reed to continue with enhanced methods before departing. Meanwhile, at Whitehall Estate, Dr. Pierce delivered troubling news during Maxwell's morning briefing. Thomas is developing resistance to the standard dosages. His neurological pathways are adapting faster than anticipated, possibly accelerated by the interaction with the Jackson girl. She displayed brain scan comparisons showing increased activity in previously suppressed regions. We have two options: significantly increase dosages beyond safety protocols established during trials, or risk complete recovery of his sensory functions before the demonstration. Maxwell didn't hesitate. Increase the dosages. We're too close to allow complications now. Dr. Pierce protested weakly, citing potential long-term damage, but Maxwell dismissed her concerns. I've invested too much to maintain his condition this long. The demonstration proceeds as scheduled. His decision prioritized the pharmaceutical launch over his son's well-being, confirming what the investigation had already revealed about his true priorities. Amara and Louisa, following carefully planned evasion protocols, made their way to a predetermined meeting point with Dr. Carter. Throughout their journey, Amara maintained her unusual connection with Thomas, experiencing flashes of his increasing distress as medication levels rose in his system. "They're hurting him worse now," she told her grandmother during a brief rest in a 24-hour diner, carefully selected to avoid security cameras. "He can't talk to me as clearly anymore, but he's fighting the medicine." Dr. Carter, after receiving their secure communication, arrived, driving an unremarkable sedan with medical supplies and documentation equipment. "We need to move quickly," he explained, while examining Amara for signs of stress or trauma. "I've been temporarily removed from rotation at Whitehall after accessing Thomas's files. It won't be long before they connect me to your situation." Together with Keisha, who joined them at a secondary location, they developed a plan to rescue Thomas and expose Maxwell. The attorney had prepared legal documents authorizing temporary protective custody based on evidence of medical endangerment, while Dr. Carter used his remaining hospital credentials to create a schedule showing Thomas due for specialized tests that would briefly remove him from the secured wing. "The key is timing," Keisha emphasized during their planning session. "Once we move, Thornton will use every resource to stop us. We'll have minutes, not hours, before his influence reaches law enforcement." The plan seemed viable until Dr. Pierce discovered Dr. Carter's unauthorized access patterns in the hospital system. Recognizing potential exposure, she immediately alerted security and positioned additional personnel near Thomas's treatment areas. When Dr. Carter arrived with formal documentation requesting temporary transfer of Thomas for specialized neurological assessment, he found the entire floor locked down under enhanced protocols. Simultaneously, police officers appeared in the lobby with detailed descriptions of Louisa and Keisha, claiming connection to an ongoing investigation. The trap had been carefully coordinated, with Maxwell's influence extending throughout city institutions. Officers immediately targeted Louisa and Keisha for arrest on fabricated charges using excessive force, particularly with Keisha, when she attempted to present legal credentials. The racial disparity in their treatment compared to other individuals in the hospital lobby was obvious to witnesses, several of whom recorded the incident on phones before security confiscated the devices. Amara, separated from the adults during the initial confusion, remembered the service corridors and ventilation systems she had learned about during visits with her grandmother. She slipped away from the confrontation, finding a maintenance access point that allowed her to disappear into the building's infrastructure where security cameras had limited coverage. Isolated and frightened, but remarkably determined, Amara felt her connection with Thomas strengthen dramatically as his medication reached dangerous levels, creating a neurological emergency that forced medical staff to temporarily discontinue some compounds. In this moment of partial clarity, Thomas established the strongest telepathic communication, yet guiding Amara through the building's complex layout toward his location with desperate urgency. Do you believe that sometimes the strongest power comes from the most vulnerable people? Comment number 1. If you think Thomas and Amara's connection represents something more powerful than all of Maxwell's wealth and influence. Or number 2. If you think the system is too powerful for two children to overcome. Hit like if you're amazed by Amara's courage in continuing despite all the adults being captured, and subscribe to see if she can reach Thomas before it's too late. With everyone who tried to protect Amara now in Thornton's custody, what chance does an 8-year-old girl have against armed security, corrupt police, and a billionaire willing to sacrifice his own son? The next part of this prevail story will reveal exactly how far Maxwell will go to protect his secrets. Whitehall Medical Center operated like its own self-contained city, with distinct zones of access reflecting social hierarchies and privilege. Amara navigated the hidden architecture of this system. The service corridors, maintenance tunnels, and staff-only passages her grandmother had sometimes shown her during late-night shifts. Her small size became an advantage, as she squeezed through spaces designed for utility access rather than human passage. Security teams conducted systematic sweeps throughout the building, their radio communications crackling with frustration as Amara remained elusive. Be advised, suspect is a black female juvenile approximately 4 feet tall, last seen wearing a green jacket and dark pants, the coordinator instructed repeatedly. This description resulted in multiple hospital employees, matching general characteristics, being stopped and questioned, creating additional chaos that inadvertently assisted Amara's progress. The racial profiling became increasingly obvious as security focused on black hospital workers, while Amara moved undetected through their search grid. Her connection with Thomas strengthened with each floor. She ascended his consciousness, guiding her movements with growing clarity. She felt his pain and disorientation as medication effects fluctuated in his system, but also his desperate determination to help her reach him. Through shared perception, Thomas projected mental images of security positions and patrol patterns, allowing Amara to time her movements between camera coverages and guard rotations. On the 14th floor, Amara encountered increased security around the restricted treatment wing. Access required biometric authentication that even her unusual abilities couldn't circumvent. Patients learned from hours sitting quietly during her grandmother's shifts served her now, as she observed patterns, identifying a maintenance credential being used to service equipment in adjacent areas. When a technician responded to a ventilation malfunction in a nearby laboratory, a distraction Thomas had created by overriding environmental controls from his room's medical interface, Amara seized the opportunity to slip through the temporarily unlocked door. Inside Thomas's treatment suite, she discovered him in alarming condition. His thin body showed signs of medication stress, tremors, clammy skin, and irregular breathing patterns. Multiple IV lines delivered compounds regulated by computerized pumps, while restraints secured his limbs to prevent interference with the delivery systems. Despite his physical distress, Thomas's face transformed with recognition when Amara approached. "You came," he whispered, voice barely audible through cracked lips. "I knew you would." Amara worked quickly to remove monitoring sensors attached to his chest and temples, remembering the arrangement of similar equipment she had observed during hospital visits. Thomas flinched as adhesive pulled at his skin, but remained focused on communicating critical information. "The medications change in 12 minutes, he explained, surprising Amara with his precise knowledge of treatment schedules. "We have to move before the next cycle starts." His words confirmed Dr. Carter's suspicions about regulated consciousness suppression rather than genuine disability. As Amara disconnected, the final monitoring cable alarms triggered at the nursing station outside. They had less time than anticipated. Thomas struggled to sit upright, his muscles weakened from years of limited mobility. "I can see everything now," he explained, as Amara helped him stand. "Not just with my eyes. I understand what he's been doing. What they've all been doing." His legs buckled immediately, forcing Amara to support his weight despite their similar size. Progress toward the door halted abruptly as it swung open, revealing Dr. Victoria Pierce. For a moment, the doctor simply stared, her professional demeanor momentarily shattered by the scene before her. Recovery came quickly as training reasserted itself. "Stop immediately," she commanded, moving to block their exit while activating an emergency signal on her pager. "Security breach in progress, TT suite," she reported tersely. Rather than immediately calling guards into the room, however, Dr. Pierce secured the door behind her, creating momentary privacy. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, voice tight with conflicting emotions. "The protocols require specific titration schedules. Interrupting them could cause permanent neurological damage." Amara positioned herself between the doctor and Thomas protectively. "You're hurting him on purpose," she stated, with the simple clarity children sometimes bring to complex ethical situations. "You make him blind when he can see." Dr. Pierce flinched slightly at the direct accusation. "The research has legitimate medical applications that could help thousands," she countered defensively. "Sometimes advancement requires difficult decisions." Thomas spoke from behind Amara, his voice stronger, despite physical weakness. "You help my father keep me sick so he can pretend to make me better." The statement hung in the air, its truth undeniable, despite the doctor's rationalization. "Maxwell possesses evidence linking me to earlier research phases," Dr. Pierce admitted, after a tense silence. "My career, my freedom, everything would be destroyed if I opposed him now." Her moral conflict became visible as professional ethics warred with self-preservation. Amara, demonstrating emotional intelligence beyond her years, recognized the opening this ambivalence created. "You can still help make things right," she suggested, while Thomas simultaneously appealed to the doctor's buried conscience. "You became a doctor to heal people," he reminded her, wisdom beyond his 7 years shining through. "Not to create injuries you could later claim to cure." Dr. Pierce visibly struggled with this fundamental truth about her professional betrayal. The conversation might have continued, but sounds of approaching security forced an immediate decision. Thomas, demonstrating unexpected resourcefulness, reached for the emergency call button typically used to summon medical assistance for genuine distress. The resulting confusion as medical staff responded to the automated alert created momentary chaos in the corridor outside. Dr. Edizem. Pierce made her choice in that critical moment, providing keycards and access codes while directing them toward a service elevator rarely monitored by security. Maxwell's private office on 17 contains documentation of everything: research records, original formulations, video logs of treatments. The safe behind the Western painting opens with his birth date. This crucial information delivered, she created additional distraction by reporting a patient emergency in the opposite direction from their escape route. Security alerts reached Maxwell during high-level meetings with potential investors for the sensory modification technology. The notification that Thomas had disappeared from his treatment room, assisted by the same black girl who had breached security earlier, triggered uncharacteristic visible anger. He abruptly terminated discussions worth potentially billions rushing from the conference room toward the hospital wing. "Find them immediately," he instructed Reed via secure communication. "Lethal measures authorized if necessary to contain the situation." He specifically directed more aggressive action toward Amara, whom he now viewed as the primary threat to everything he had built. "The girl is dangerous and unstable," he told security teams, creating preemptive justification for whatever force might be employed against an 8-year-old child whose only crime had been discovering his carefully constructed lies. Amara navigated unfamiliar corridors with Thomas leaning heavily against her shoulder, his muscles weakened from years of medically enforced inactivity. The access codes Dr. Pierce had provided guided them through service areas toward the executive wing on the 17th floor. Security teams focused their search on building exits and ground floors, not expecting the children to move deeper into the facility. Thomas, experiencing extended clarity, as distance from his medication regimen increased, shared crucial information about his father's private office. "He doesn't allow cleaning staff inside without supervision," he explained between labored breaths as they entered the executive level. The security cameras feed to a closed system separate from the main building network. This insight, gleaned from years of overhearing conversations, while presumed deaf and oblivious, proved invaluable as they timed their movements between surveillance sweeps. Maxwell's private office occupied the southeast corner of the building, offering commanding views of both downtown and the Oakwood neighborhood, his expansion plans targeted. Biometric locks secured the entrance, but Dr. Ten's Eddie E. Pierce's executive medical override temporarily bypassed these systems for emergency access. Inside opulent furnishings contrasted sharply with the sterile medical environments Thomas had known his entire life. The computer Thomas directed weakly, pointing toward a sleek workstation. The files are under Project Insight in his private server. Amara helped Thomas into the executive chair before following his instructions to access the system. The password prompts initially stopped their progress until Thomas recalled fragments of overheard information. "Try Elizabeth 7734, he suggested, naming his mother and the compound identification number used in his treatments. The system unlocked immediately, revealing folders containing years of research documentation. They downloaded critical files to a portable drive found in the desk drawer, working quickly as Thomas directed the search toward the most damning evidence. The videos, he insisted, growing stronger as his system continued clearing the suppression medications. He recorded everything from the beginning. Meanwhile, Amara located the painting Thomas had described, an abstract rendering of neural pathways that concealed a wall safe. The combination as Dr. Pierce had indicated matched Maxwell's birth date. Inside, they discovered original documentation of the experiments, including handwritten research journals dating back to trials conducted before Thomas's birth. Most disturbing were video logs showing Maxwell personally administering the initial compounds to infant Thomas while clinically documenting the progressive loss of sensory function with detached scientific precision. The footage revealed a father who viewed his child primarily as a research subject, rather than a person deserving protection and care. Across the city, Troy orchestrated a digital countermeasure from his captivity. Despite physical restraints, he had maintained access to emergency protocols through biometric implants beneath his skin, technology he had developed for precisely such situations. Activating these systems remotely, he triggered a pre-programmed hack that bypassed Thornton's security firewalls, broadcasting evidence of discriminatory practices and medical ethics violations across social media platforms and medical 17s directly to regulatory authorities. The Oakwood community, already mobilized by news of Louisa and Keisha's arrests, gathered outside the hospital in unprecedented numbers. The crowd included residents from across the city who had recognized the pattern of injustice represented in Thornton's actions. Dr. Carter, released from temporary detention after colleagues intervened, joined community leaders in demanding accountability and transparency. Inside the executive suite, Amara and Thomas finished securing evidence when the office door slammed open. Maxwell Thornton stood in the entrance face, contorted with a fury neither child had witnessed before. He had bypassed the crowds through a private underground entrance, leaving security teams to manage the growing protest while he personally addressed the threat to his empire. "Step away from my property," he commanded, gaze fixed on the portable drive in Amara's hand. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Thomas straightened in the executive chair, facing his father directly for the first time without medication clouding his perceptions. "I know exactly what you've done," he responded with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. "You kept me blind and deaf when I could see and hear. You lied to everyone." Maxwell's expression shifted to something calculating as he recalibrated his approach. "Thomas, you don't understand the complexity of your condition. The treatments were necessary medical interventions for your protection." His tone conveyed reasonable concern, a stark contrast to his previous anger. "This girl has endangered your health by interrupting carefully calibrated treatment protocols." Thomas shook his head, certainty evident despite his physical weakness. "I saw the videos. You did this to make money from the medicines." The The simplicity of this truth pierced through Maxwell's elaborate justifications. His attention shifted to Amara, voice hardening as he addressed her directly. "You have no right to be here. Your kind always wants something for nothing, taking what others have built through hard work and intelligence." The mask of civility slipped completely as racial prejudice underlying his business practices emerged explicitly. "Your parents should have accepted my generous settlement offer instead of threatening legal action over standard industrial procedures." This reference to her family history confirmed Keisha's discovery about Thornton's connection to the factory accident that had orphaned Amara. Maxwell stepped closer, shifting tactics again. "I can make your lives very comfortable. Financial compensation for your grandmother. Educational opportunities beyond anything Oakwood could provide, privileged status within the new development." His offer revealed his fundamental belief that everyone had a price, that principles would always yield to self-interest when sufficient resources were applied. "All I require is your silence and that drive." Thomas answered before Amara could respond. "I'm going to tell everyone the truth," he stated, simply the moral clarity of childhood cutting through adult rationalizations. "What you did was wrong." Maxwell's expression transformed as he recognized the fundamental threat his son now represented to everything he had built. With shocking suddenness, he moved toward Thomas with predatory focus, producing a syringe filled with concentrated vision-suppressing compound. "This will stabilize your condition until proper protocols can be re-established," he stated with clinical detachment that poorly masked his desperation. Amara reacted instinctively, placing herself between father and son. "Leave him alone," she demanded, small hands pushing against Maxwell's chest with surprising strength. The physical contact triggered Maxwell's violent response as he shoved her roughly aside, sending her crashing into a display cabinet that shattered on impact. Thomas cried out in distress as Maxwell approached with the syringe, but Amara recovered quickly, grabbing a heavy award statuette from the desk. She swung it defensively, not aiming to injure but creating space between Maxwell and Thomas, while simultaneously activating the phone in her pocket to record what was happening. The confrontation escalated as Maxwell, increasingly desperate, attempted to restrain Amara while maintaining control of the syringe. In the struggle, medical equipment Thomas had pulled from the desk created a temporary barricade, giving Amara seconds to activate the streaming function Troy had installed, sending everything directly to secure servers beyond Thornton's reach. Outside Dr. Carter and Keisha, finally released after community pressure and legal intervention, forced authorities to acknowledge the improper detention, broke through security lines with hospital staff who had witnessed enough to question Thornton's narrative. They arrived at the executive level as Maxwell prepared a second syringe, this one intended for Amara, to eliminate her as a witness. "Both compounds are experimental," he stated with terrifying calm. "The effects on your particular neurological structure should prove scientifically valuable at minimum." In the ensuing struggle, both syringes broke, exposing Maxwell to concentrated doses of his own drug. The effect was immediate and dramatic. His coordination faltered, pupils dilated unevenly, and spatial perception distorted severely. He staggered backward, experiencing the sensory disruption he had inflicted on Thomas for years. Security teams breached the office moments later, witnessing their employer's disorientation and the two children supporting each other despite injuries. The evidence visible on computer screens, the open safe revealing damning documentation, and Maxwell's incoherent statements as the compounds affected his neural functions, created an unmistakable picture of corporate criminality that even the most loyal security personnel couldn't ignore or justify. 3 months following the confrontation at Whitehall Medical Center, Maxwell Thornton sat in a federal courtroom as prosecutors detailed charges including illegal human experimentation, fraud, corporate corruption, and civil rights violations, targeting the Oakwood community. The evidence retrieved by Amara and Thomas had triggered investigations across multiple regulatory agencies, revealing decades of unethical practices beneath the veneer of pharmaceutical innovation. Thomas, now living with his maternal aunt Catherine in a modest suburban home, attended the proceedings accompanied by specialized therapists supporting his recovery. His progress had been remarkable. Full sensory abilities returned within weeks once the suppression compounds cleared his system, though emotional healing would require longer care. When called to testify about his experiences, Thomas spoke with composed clarity that silenced the courtroom. "My earliest memory is darkness," he explained, "but I always knew something was wrong with how they said I was born." His testimony about experiencing the world through medication-enforced limitations while understanding conversations around him proved devastating to his father's defense claims. The Thornton pharmaceutical patents for sensory modification were invalidated through emergency regulatory action, with research redirected toward legitimate medical applications under ethical oversight committees that included community representatives from populations previously exploited in testing programs. Dr. Victoria Pierce, facing her own legal consequences, chose cooperation with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. Her testimony about corporate practices specifically targeting minority communities for early-stage trials proved crucial in establishing patterns of discrimination embedded in Thornton's business model. These revelations sparked broader industry reviews of pharmaceutical testing protocols and community consent standards. Amara received appropriate medical treatment for injuries sustained during the confrontation, while her unique neurological abilities attracted respectful scientific interest under Dr. Carter's protective supervision. Rather than becoming a research subject herself, Amara participated in establishing guidelines for studying enhanced perception abilities, with protocols emphasizing participant autonomy and dignity. The doctor established a research foundation specifically honoring gifts like Amara's rather than exploiting them, creating educational pathways for children from disadvantaged communities to enter medical fields with their Amara's perspectives intact. The transformation of Oakwood began with a substantial settlement fund, created from frozen Thornton assets, addressing decades of intentional infrastructure neglect, while establishing community ownership structures that prevented future corporate predation. The neighborhood rehabilitation emphasized preserving cultural heritage while building new educational facilities, specializing in science, ethics, and medical humanities. Amara Jackson emerged as a respected community leader on the Oversight Committee, ensuring medical research respected all populations equally. Her practical wisdom, complementing professional expertise in establishing new standards for informed consent across demographic boundaries. The partnership between community experience and academic knowledge created models adopted nationally for ethical research practices. Thomas legally separated from his father's name, choosing his mother's maiden name, while embracing his healing journey with remarkable resilience. The bond between Thomas and Amara evolved into a special friendship grounded in their unique connection and shared experience of challenging systemic injustice. Together, they established a children's advocacy organization, ensuring medical transparency for vulnerable populations. Their personal testimony, creating powerful educational resources about consent, autonomy, and the dangers of treating certain communities as expendable in pursuing scientific advancement. Whitehall Medical Center implemented comprehensive bias training and community accountability standards, with Dr. Carter advancing to a leadership position specifically focused on promoting diversity in medical research methodologies and participation. The hospital's transformation became a case study in institutional reform, demonstrating how organizations could acknowledge harmful patterns and implement meaningful structural changes rather than superficial policy adjustments. In a powerful closing scene that captured national attention, Amara and Thomas addressed a congressional hearing on medical ethics and racial equity in healthcare access. Their testimony, balancing personal experience with systemic analysis, created foundation principles for national policy changes, addressing long-standing disparities in research protections. Thomas concluded with the recognition that true sight wasn't just physical vision, but the clarity to see humanity in everyone regardless of color or circumstance, wisdom earned through experiencing both enforced limitation and liberation. Amara, standing beside him with quiet confidence beyond her years, observed that the most important cure hadn't been medical, but the healing of divided communities through truth and justice. Their joined hands symbolized the connection between individual healing and collective transformation, reminding those in power that even the smallest voices could ultimately bring the largest systems of injustice into the light of accountability and change. What would you do if you discovered someone using power and privilege to harm those who couldn't defend themselves? Would you have the courage to stand up like Amara did, even when all the odds seemed stacked against you? Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about how each of us can recognize and challenge injustice in our own communities. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content that explores these important themes. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the greatest power comes from the most unexpected sources, and that true healing requires both justice and compassion. Thank you for joining me on this journey through darkness into light. This story reveals powerful truths about justice and humanity. First, it shows how systems of power often exploit the most vulnerable using racial biases to determine whose lives have value. Maxwell's willingness to sacrifice his own son while targeting the Oakwood community demonstrates how prejudice corrupts moral boundaries. Second, we see how small acts of connection can dismantle even the most entrenched injustice. Amara's simple touch, bridging racial, economic, and social divides, created a healing connection that no amount of wealth or power could prevent. Third, the story highlights the dangers of placing profit above human dignity. By treating his son and the Oakwood residents as mere resources for exploitation, Maxwell lost his humanity long before facing legal consequences. Most importantly, this narrative reminds us that true sight goes beyond physical vision. It requires seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of circumstance or background. Healing never comes from technology or wealth alone, but through truth, justice, and genuine connection between people. Finally, the courage of children often shames the compromises of adults. Amara and Thomas, unbound by learned prejudice and institutional loyalty, could see injustice clearly and stand against it when many adults remained complicit through silence. What would you do if faced with injustice protected by wealth and power? Would you find Amara's courage to stand up for what's right, even when the system seems unbeatable? Share your thoughts in the comments below about a time you witnessed someone using privilege to harm others, and how you responded or wish you had responded. Have you ever formed a connection with someone from a completely different background that changed your perspective? Let us know by commenting "connection" followed by your story. If this tale of courage against racial discrimination moved you, please hit the like button to help others discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose hidden truths about our society. And if you know someone who needs inspiration to fight their own battles against injustice, share this video with them today. Thank you for joining our community that believes in the power of truth to create healing. May we all find the clarity to see each other's humanity beyond the divisions that separate us.